Welcome back, I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Online, the Designs Dissected series, where we look at two designs using our AI, DesignEye, and letting it analyse the designs on the principles and elements of design and give us some feedback about the design so that we can look at these designs and improve them the next time we get that sort of a class title around. This week we're looking at From the Woodshed and Futuristic. So two very different designs, and each of them in their own right were problematic in putting together for me when I did them. Firstly, we're going to look at From the Woodshed. Now this was a design where we could only use on this particular day Australian native flora, and if you've looked at any of the other videos you'll know that this is a common theme annually for this particular competition. So in putting that together, I was thinking about a woodshed and what a woodshed is like at the back of a farm, particularly for me in my environment. And it is about sticks and things gathering where the wood is stored. So the base I've used there is a slice of a banksia tree, and on that I have built a bit of a pyramid or a bit of a structure out of sticks that are joined together in a lattice format, and then through that I've got some banksia, because often we find that with a woodshed, at the woodshed, that the plants will grow through the wood that is stored there over a considerable period of time. I've got a couple of banksia flowers in through the structure that I've built around it, and on the structure, which is a little bit more difficult to see in this image, I've actually used some gum nuts to make spiders, and that was just a whimsical thing that I did. So it's just a gum nut with some wire placed through it for the legs, black wire placed through it for the legs, and I just wanted to add a little bit of humour to my particular design. This design placed first in the competition, and I was very happy with that. I can look at it now and see that there are some things that I would probably change with it, but at the time I was very happy that it had gained the judges' recognition in that way, because I put a lot of effort into thinking about how I would put it together and how I wanted it to look, and it did actually come out the way I wanted it to look, which is always a good thing when you're putting your designs together. So let's now see what DesignEye has got to say about this. Looking at line, first of all, the design prominently features horizontal and vertical lines created by the stacked sticks. These lines guide the viewer's eye upwards and contribute to the overall structure and stability of the piece. The shapes in the design are mostly linear and geometric, with the sticks forming a layered conical structure. The round base and the organic shapes of the leaves and seed pods add contrast to the angular sticks. I'd agree with all of that. My concern when I look at it is the gap between the top of the stick structure and where the banksia flower is placed and where the foliage spreads out. So I just think that gap is a little bit too high, but let's see what else DesignEye has got to tell us about the design. The form is three-dimensional, with the layered sticks creating depth and volume. The arrangement of the sticks and the addition of the foliage at the top give the design a sculptural quality. So that's good. It obviously is feeling that there's not too much of a gap between the two, that it's all just still one design. So it will be interesting to see when we get to Unity what it's got to say about Unity. There is a rich variety of textures in the design, from the rough, rugged texture of the sticks to the softer, more delicate texture of the leaves and the seed pods. This contrast in texture adds visual interest and tactile appeal. The colour palette is natural and earthy, with the brown tones of the wood and the green of the foliage. The muted natural colours create a harmonious and calming effect, evocative of a woodland setting. See, what I'm interested in is that although the designer was given the title From the Woodshed, it's thinking about it in terms of a woodland setting. It might still be okay to think of it that way, but we'll probably have to give DesignEye a little bit more instruction about what we mean by the title, so that when you're submitting a design of your own, what happens is that we put it through DesignEye, let the analysis come out, and then we as humans have a look at it and think about how we would judge it in terms of focusing much more on the title, because we know that with images it's a little bit hard for DesignEye sometimes to match the title with what it's seeing in the image, and that can only be based on the clarity of the image. So as with this one, where it can't really see the gumnut spiders, it's not commenting on those because it can't identify those as anything more than part of the stick structure. So be reassured that a human will always look at the analysis before you get it, so it's going to make sense to you and it's going to be relevant to your educational journey through floral art. Back to our analysis of this one. Space is used effectively, with the open spaces between the sticks allowing light to filter through and preventing the design from appearing too dense or heavy. The negative space around the foliage at the top adds to the sense of openness. So that's good, because it is important in designs for you to be able to see everything that is in the design and to not make it too bottom heavy or too top heavy. And the challenge with this one, because that Banksia slice base is so dense, it could be seen as the dominant feature if I didn't have enough openness and lightness around the rest of the design to take your eye away from that base and move it through the design. The design achieves a sense of balance through the symmetrical arrangement of sticks around the central axis. The foliage at the top adds visual weight, creating an asymmetrical but balanced composition. So that's what I was talking about, is that visual weight is not based in the bottom part of the design where there is a lot more material, because the openness means that you move your eye through the design. There is contrast between the rough angular sticks and the softer organic shapes of the foliage and seed pods. This contrast adds visual interest and emphasises the natural materials. The emphasis is on the top part of the design, where the foliage and seed pods are located. This focal point draws the viewer's eye upwards through the layered structure. So this is really interesting, because if you look at this design, it has most of the material in the bottom half, the lower half of the design, and yet the focal point is the top, because your eye is drawn upwards to that, as it says in this analysis. So the shape and the placement and the movement that is created by that placement means that where your eye stops is the top of the design, not at the bottom. So that top becomes the focal point. Rhythm is created through the repetition of sticks arranged in layers. This repetition guides the viewer's eye upward in a rhythmic flow, contributing to the overall unity of the design. So this was the thing I was interested in, is whether there was unity in the design. I think that becomes the next part of the analysis. But in terms of rhythm, the rhythm and that repetition is helping to create some unity within the design. So let's see what the unity comment is. The design feels unified through the consistent use of natural materials and a cohesive colour palette. The repetition of elements and the harmonious colours contribute to a sense of oneness. And the proportion of elements is well considered, with the size of the sticks balanced against the central base and the foliage. This creates a pleasing visual ratio and a sense of stability. So it's not as concerned about that gap as I am. And I guess what I could have done is continue to bring that cone shape up to almost the base of the Banksia flower, so that your eye continued to be drawn up, or perhaps I needed something that gives it a bit of movement there, so a spiral up rather than continuing that very rigid square structure that's there. So let's see what it's got as its suggestions for improving this design. Colour variety. Add small flowers in soft yellows or light greens to complement the earthy tones and create a more diverse colour palette. So that's a good suggestion, because we have got the yellow of the Banksia flower at the top there. Element sizes. Mix larger branches with smaller twigs or add tiny seed pods to create varied composition. Use elements like smooth river stones, textured bark pieces or moss to add layers of texture. And that's something that I could have done. I could have had some lichens that came from the top of the stick structure to the bottom of where the Banksia flower is. Arrange some sticks or foliage in a curving or diagonal pattern to create a sense of motion. And once again, that was something that I thought of myself. Weave some of the foliage through the sticks more intricately, or arrange seed pods in a more organic pattern to enhance unity. So that's an interesting one. I'm not keen on the idea of putting foliage through the sticks. I just think that that takes away from making the top of that design the focal point. So I'd have to really practice that to see that it was going to work and not detract from the overall clean lines in this design, which is, that's my design style. I do like to have clean lines on everything. So there is our analysis and our suggestions about from the Woodshed. Let's now move on to our second design, which is Futuristic. Our second design is Futuristic, and this was part of a annual countrywide convention, so a national convention, and so the competition's pretty stiff, the judging's pretty harsh, and this design was very, very problematic for me in terms of staging. I travelled air flight and train and road travel to get to the competition, so this was a takedown design that I had practiced beforehand. I knew how long it should take to put it together in terms of the stringing and the structure, getting the structure stable. A bit hard to say. That wasn't the case when I went to put it together. I had all sorts of problems getting the tension right for the stringing, and it took much, much longer than I had allocated to put it together. I had two designs that I was supposed to put together for this competition, one in another class, which I didn't get to finish, and it was very distressing for me, and it was seen as me not managing my time well, which was true. And what I should have done is withdrawn from the other class so that I didn't give it half an attempt, which is what happened in the end, in my eyes anyway. This design is very futuristic in terms of its construction. I was hoping to push the judges into thinking that regarding the string as plant material, this was one of the first times that we were allowed to use string and jute and those sorts of plant-based products in our designs, and I wanted to push the envelope a bit, as I do, and see what the judges thought. The design itself at the end of the competition didn't win any prizes, but one of the judges of the class afterwards informed me that the judges had felt it was worthy of a commendation because of the technique and the fact that I had thought about using the string, but they didn't, in her words, they didn't get round to doing that. So at least I got the feedback that it was worthy of note in their eyes, and I know myself when I look at it the things that I would have done differently in terms of its composition as a floral art piece. But let's see what DesignEye has got to say. So just a little bit about the construction of it. First of all, it's a timber base, a hard timber base that's covered in aluminium foil, and there's two flexible rods that are actually the tops of flags that you might see out on the street, advertising flags. So they're fiberglass, so I can bend them with the tension of the string. So I've put a wrapped wire around them and put little hooks in the wire so that I could do the stringing, and I knew that it was going to keep it stable. And it's done in a pattern that pulls it into a spiral finished shape of the stringing. And then there's some test tubes with protea flowers in them, and then some craspedia which don't need the water source. And then to add a little bit of repetition of the silver colouring to make it futuristic in that sense, I've ripped up a scouring pad, a steel, not steel wool, but aluminium, those spiral coiled ones, and just pull that apart. So I've got lots of little spirals of the aluminium just to give it, to my mind, the futuristic feel. So that's how it came together. Let's see now what DesignEye has got to say about it in terms of the principles and elements of design, and then some suggestions for improvement after that. Starting with line, the design features prominent lines created by the strings, which create a sweeping curved form. These lines draw the viewer's eye through the design, giving it a sense of movement and flow, which is great because that's what I wanted. The shapes in the design are both geometric and organic, The curved lines form a semicircular shape, while the flowers and spherical elements add organic shapes. So once again, it's still repeating the same sort of shapes and the same sort of form, but it's giving it some depth. Form. The form is three-dimensional, with the strings and flowers creating depth and volume. The arrangement suggests a dynamic, futuristic structure that appears light and airy. So I think that's very rewarding for me to see that an independent eye can look at it in terms of the title and say, yes, it does look futuristic in terms of its structure. There is a variety of textures in the design, from the smooth, shiny surface of the foil to the soft, intricate texture of the flowers. The contrast between these textures adds visual interest. Once again, something we always want to have, some contrast to provide us with visual interest. The colour palette is relatively minimal, with the silver foil and the green strings creating a cool metallic feel, contrasted by the warm, vibrant oranges and yellows of the flowers. This creates a striking contrast and a modern aesthetic. So that's very important, that in terms of thinking about the colour palette, that I made sure that there was a contrast that was reflective of the modern futuristic theme that we were trying to get in this particular design. Space is used effectively, with the open areas between the strings and flowers allowing the design to breathe. The negative space highlights the linear and curved elements, enhancing the overall structure. So, as I've said previously, I do like clean lines in my designs, and so that is what I always strive for. That allows me to think about the space between the lines that I'm creating by the design. The design achieves a sense of balance through the asymmetrical arrangement of the elements. The distribution of the flowers and spheres along the strings creates visual weight that is balanced on both sides of the central axis. So once again, as I've suggested before, if you put the theoretical vertical line through the centre of the design, is it balanced on both sides? Is there weight visually on one more on one side than the other? And because of where I've put the flowers and the size of the flowers, I was very careful about doing that as well. It creates that balance between the two halves of the design. There is strong contrast between the shiny metallic elements and the soft organic flowers. This contrast highlights the different materials and emphasises the futuristic theme. So once again, that choice of contrast in simple things like the colours and the form of the design materials has highlighted my interpretation of that class title. The emphasis is on the curved structure formed by the strings and the placement of the flowers. This focal point draws the viewer's eye and creates a sense of movement. And that's true. My concern with it when looking at it now with this analysis is that some of those flowers are a bit visually dominant, and they don't really add to that movement, that sense of movement in the design. I'd have to look at placing them a little bit better than I did for this particular competition. Rhythm is created through the repetition of the strings and the placement of flowers at regular intervals. This repetition guides the viewer's eye through the design and creates a sense of harmony. So the analysis is feeling that there is still rhythm in the design, and I think that's probably true, but I think a lot of it is created by the actual structure, and because that's not overtly plant material, it would be considered in a lot of competitions that there wasn't enough plant material in this design, because the dominant feature of the design in this sense is that stringing section, which in a lot of competitions would not be considered plant material, even though it's plant-based material. The design feels unified through the consistent use of colours and materials. The combination of metallic elements and vibrant flowers creates a cohesive look that fits the futuristic theme. So I think we've probably covered that in the other comments, and that it's rewarding to know that that contrast still is making it feel unified, and that it fits the theme. The proportion of elements is well considered, with the size of the flowers and spheres balanced against the length and curvature of the strings. This creates a pleasing visual ratio and a sense of harmony. So I'm not as convinced about that. I think that the proportion, the elements, would need to be reviewed. I think it could be better than it is, I guess is what I'm saying. So let's have a look at now at some suggestions for what we could do better, what I could do better. Additional colours introduce small accents of metallic blues or purples in the flowers or other elements to add depth and variety. Now that'd be interesting because perhaps I could use something like a strelitzia that's got the purple in it as well as the orange colours, so I'm still going to get that contrast, and it's going to be a different shape, so it's going to be a different, provide a different element to the design rather than the continuously rounded shapes or curved lines that are there now. Texture variety incorporates smooth glass beads or rougher natural materials like bark or stone to add layers of texture and enhance the tactile appeal. I guess I could. I'd probably go for the smooth because my visualization of Futuristic was that it was all very smooth surfaces. There was no rough surfaces in the Futuristic vision that I had in my head. Use of space extends some strings or elements outward to create a more expansive design, enhancing the sense of movement and fluidity. Now that would be interesting in terms of, perhaps again, if I'd use the strelitzia, I could have it at one end coming out from the curve, and so making it like a space projectile almost coming out from the curved arm. So that's one that I would consider thinking about and practicing and having a look at. Weave some flowers or spheres more intricately through the strings to ensure all the elements feel cohesive and connected. This is not one I'm a big fan of. As with the previous design from the Woodshed, I think that weaving things through elements that I've already got there makes it, in my eyes, a little bit fuller and a little bit less clean in the lining of what I'm trying to do with my designs, and so it's probably, I might look at it, but I would have to be really convinced. It would have to wow me for me to feel like that was a better way of presenting this particular design. So there we have our two designs for this week, Futuristic and from the Woodshed. As I said during the analysis time, please take the opportunity to submit your designs so that you can have them analysed and we can help you in your journey of looking at your designs and looking at ways that they could be enhanced or improved or changed. And it doesn't really matter whether they're for competition or whether you're just doing them because you enjoy putting the flowers together and seeing what you can create with your ideas in your head. It still gives you some other ideas to think about. It's a sounding board, basically. So all you need to do is go to the website floralartonline.com/DesignEye and upload your image, and within 24 hours you will have your analysis back with our review of it as well, so that it will help you on your floral art journey. Thanks for being with me today. That's our lot for this week. I will talk to you next time. For now, I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Online, the Designs Dissected series.